All right, guys, it's finally here. The month you've all been waiting for. The time of year when you get to stow away your razors and let your inner mountain man out. No Shave November.
And the ladies in your life may or may not be as excited about your beard as you are. So, for your well-being and the preservation of your relationships, we have a few tips for you to share with all those men in your life ready to get started on No Shave November.
Number 1, live within your means. Nobody likes a half-grown, patchy, wispy beard.
Number 2, care for what you've been given. Guys, trust me on this. Beard oil and conditioner can go a long way.
Number 3, just because you can does not mean you should.
And number 4, remember your potential impact.
Some of you may be asking, but Melissa, what do beards have to do with our faith? I'm glad you asked. These tips for managing your beard are also pretty good tips for managing your finances, and believe it or not, our faith has something to say about that. Money's a thing. It impacts us all. Sometimes we get stressed out about it, and most of the time we don't want to talk about it in church. But that doesn't mean it's not relevant. Here at TUMC, we're going to talk about finances, but we're going to do it with no shame. And we're not just asking you to give money, we're going to look at how our faith informs how we spend our money. Join us over the next month as we use beards as a lighthearted way to talk about our finances with no shame.
All right. Well, today we're wrapping up our sermon series on faith and finances. This is our last week in No Shame November, and we've been talking about a little bit about what our faith has to say about how we spend our money, what our biblical beliefs have to say about our bank accounts, what beards can teach us, and what the rules that govern facial hair can teach us about how we spend money. And it's been hopefully a little bit fun for you, hopefully a little bit informative. Hopefully you've come and grown a little bit. That's kind of always our goal, that you'll grow a little closer to God than you were when you woke up this morning. But hopefully, and I can't stress this enough, we've been able to do this without shame. Right? Because I think most of y'all have experienced this with me, that one of the things that tends to kind of circle around conversations about money tends to be a lot of shame. And so as a church, we decided from the start we were going to do this, like in the title, we're going to call it No Shame November, because we want to make sure we can have these conversations, because they're really important conversations, but that we can do it without anxiety, without pain, without discomfort, that we can do it and kind of cut to the heart of things without getting to the point where we feel like things are painful. But I want to close, as we're closing our sermon series on No Shame November, with talking about what kind of inspired us to begin with. And that was this thing called No Shave November. Right. I want to talk about the story a little bit about why it is that in the month of November, quite a few of you have decided to grow out facial hair or beards, or at least those of the male persuasion have decided to grow out facial hair and beards. One young man stole his father's razor so that he couldn't not grow out facial hair and a beard. I am so proud of you, bro. That's awesome. But why is it that in November there's this cultural phenomenon? It's actually pretty big, where people all over the world decide that now is the time to grow a mustache. Now is the time to grow a beard. Why is it that we're talking about this in November? Warmer. It's too warm right now, right? Well, it's finally cold. It's finally cold on the 20th, right? The most reliable histories trace this story back to 2003. 2003, Melbourne, Australia, a small bar called The Gypsy. And it was there that two friends, Travis and Luke, gathered one night, and they were having a quiet night, having a conversation, talking about trends and what was new and fashion and all of these different things. This is 2003. And they're having a conversation, and they have one very important conclusion they come to, a question they can't put down. And that question is this: why was it so fashionable for our fathers and grandfathers, for generations of men before us, to grow big, burly, awesome walrus mustaches? And yet so few millennials now have grown mustaches at all. Why is it that the mustache was so prevalent for generations, but amongst 20-year-olds it was so rare? This is a very deep philosophical question, right? Some of you understand the depths of this philosophical question. Some of you are from a generation where that wasn't part of the question. But as the night escalated, these men began to get more and more excited about this idea, right? And they began to think, what would happen if we could mobilize our friends and all of us would grow mustaches? And then they got this crazy idea. What would happen if we would do it for a good cause? One of their friends' moms was raising money for breast cancer research. And they thought, what if we could use mustaches to raise money for a good cause? And so they gathered 30 of their friends and said, all right, guys, here's the deal. We're going to not shave in the month of November. Pretty simple, right? Most people can go 30-something days without shaving. We're going to not shave in the month of November. And all the money that we would have spent on shaving cream and razors and all of that, we're going to give to prostate cancer research. We're going to give towards men's health issues. And so it started pretty simple, right? It started almost like as kind of a harebrained, weird idea, but it got personal really quick. See, some of those guys realized that they were not only participating in something that was a little weird, but it had a good cause. Some of the guys realized that they were starting to grow facial hair on behalf of friends and family who were undergoing chemo treatments and couldn't. And so for some of these guys, it became intensely personal, and they, the 30 of them powered through November that first year, and it was great, and they were kind of excited at the end of the year, and they gave their big check to the Prostate Cancer Research Foundation of Australia. And the next year came and said, hey, that was fun. Let's do that again. But this year, 450 people participated. And $54,000 was given, the largest single check ever given at that time, to prostate cancer research in Australia. And the next year, it was $1.2 million. By 2007, it was $21.5 million they were giving away as this thing grew and grew and grew, as this ridiculous campaign that started as a joke at a wild night in a bar in Melbourne, Australia, began to spread across the world. And to date, since 2003, this campaign has given away $580 million towards prostate cancer research and men's health. It started as a joke. But somewhere in there, it caught hold of people, and they began to see a cause worth following, and they began to do something countercultural. Not just to grow a mustache in a generation that didn't, but to give what they had, something as small as a few dollars they would have spent on shaving cream, or as much as sometimes significantly larger sums, to give towards something they believed in. And that's weird, right? And we live in a society where giving is not exactly common, and we're going to talk about that today. Giving is not the most common thing in our society. It's countercultural to say, I'm going to take out of my bank account and give to somebody else's. We're taught that that's not good economics. Here in Kansas, the average person gives away 2.3% of their income to charitable sources every year, according to tax returns. Now, the good news is that's actually better than a lot of other states. We're doing really, really well. But it's not as high as some of us might have guessed. See, many of us see the importance of giving. And we cheer stories of guys like these two guys in Australia who mobilize their friends to make a difference in a worthwhile cause. Or we hear about guys like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett who decide they're going to give away half of their incomes, and we think that's awesome, right? We love these things. But some of us also recognize how weird giving is, how uncomfortable it is, how much effort it takes. Some of us have experienced this. I know I have. We want to give, but by the time the end of the month rolls around, we've had a house payment and a car payment and groceries, and sometimes giving gets tough. So we're going to talk about giving today. And I want to make two big disclaimers as we go in, because this is a tough conversation, and so remember, we're doing this with no shame, but two big disclaimers. One, at the end of this, I'm going to actually ask you to give, right? I'm going to ask you to give, and we'll talk about pledging towards the end. But two, the other thing is that, you know what? Giving isn't just money. Part of what we give is money, but part of what we give is our time and our passion, our prayers, our talents, our service. I mean, we're going to talk about giving, not just in the financial terms, but in the terms of our whole life. At the end of this service, we're going to pass in pledge cards, and we're going to consecrate. That means we're going to pray over these gifts, and we're going to ask that God uses them to make a difference in our world. But giving is weird. It's countercultural. It's not something that you would find in most people. And so as we talk about giving, I want to dive into three related questions. Actually, they'll build one big question, but I want to start with a simple question of why give anything at all? Why give? Now, there are lots of possible reasons why we might say we give money or time or passion, why we might involve ourselves and our lives in something else. For some of you, it's because we feel like we're supposed to, or because our parents taught us to, or because the Bible tells us to, or because we believe that something that we're doing is important. For some of us, we have lots of different reasons why we feel like we should give. But today I want to look at a different reason, and that's that giving is good for us. And that sounds weird, right? I mean, that doesn't seem to square with what we think. And over the past 3 weeks, we've talked about this a couple different ways, how stewardship and how our relationship with our finances can kind of start to enslave us. And so there's things we do to protect our lives. We've talked about that, but it's more than that. The Bible actually talks about giving as a good thing. Good for us, not just in the spiritual sense, but here and now. So when I think about this, I think about a few years ago when Melissa was picking Christmas gifts for the family. She's way better at giving gifts than I am, and so she kind of takes points on deciding who gets what and does an awesome job. And so she bought her father, my father-in-law, something really unique. Instead of getting him another gadget or a tie or some sports stuff, she got him something different. She purchased livestock in a developing country for a developing farmer. Now, this is kind of a weird gift because he's not actually going to see this gift, right? He's never going to touch the animals that we purchased. Actually, this was, we might even call it forced generosity. Like we kind of gave a gifts for him, through him. So some of you might need to be careful with that for Christmas. That might not be what your spouse was hoping for. I don't know. Buyer beware. But it was kind of cool because he got to find out that somebody in the third world was getting goats and chickens and everything they needed to start a self-sustaining farm in his honor and in his name. And the thing is, that's kind of unique and that's kind of weird, and yet he still talks about that as one of the best gifts he's ever received. It was the gift of generosity on his behalf. And that sounds kind of trite, right? Like that sounds even a little bit too hallmarky, too good to be true, happily ever after. But the thing is, it's not just sappy, it's neuroscience. See, science backs this up, that giving and generosity is something that brings us joy. And if you haven't experienced this, I'll break it down. Dr. Bill Harbaugh at the University of Oregon ran people through a functional MRI, and he scanned their brains and watched what was happening as they were giving to causes they found valuable. And he found that generosity, the act of giving money away, actually lights up the pleasure centers in our brain that are used and reserved for our most fundamental, primal, base level desires. Here's a quote. When people made the decision to donate to what they felt was a worthy organization, parts of the midbrain lit up, the same region that controls cravings for food and sex. What that means is that giving is hardwired into us. That somewhere at our deepest core we find, in our most animal brain, we find that giving to other people is something that brings us joy and pleasure. It's something that is as integral to our brains as eating and procreating. Listen to how the Bible spells it out in 1 Timothy 6, 18 to 19, the passage that Dana read. Tell them to be good, to be rich in the good things they do, to be generous and to share with others. Right? Be generous, give stuff. When they do these things, they'll save a treasure for themselves that is a good foundation for the future. And that way they can take hold of what is truly life. Take hold of what is life. See, sometimes we give to protect ourselves from our money becoming our God. Right? And we've talked about that for the last couple of weeks. It's on the website if you want. But sometimes we give because we find that that's part of what we were made to do. Our finances, our skills, our time. I want you to imagine with me a time that you helped somebody, that you made a difference in somebody's life. Maybe small, maybe big, whatever it looks like. Imagine a time that you helped somebody that you can remember and recall. Maybe it was a time that you helped somebody move, that you gave of your time. Maybe it was a time that you lent somebody your expertise, a skill set that you had that they needed. Maybe it was a way that you got involved in one of the projects here, like our Beanie Baby project this afternoon, a time that you made a difference in somebody's life. Now think about it. What's brought you more joy over the years? That or the clothes you were wearing while you did it, or the meal you had later that day after it was done. Sometimes we give because it makes a difference in us, because we feel like we're called to do it because it brings us joy. If you haven't experienced that, I want to challenge you just to try it in a small way. Maybe not even with money, but just go help someone and see what it does. See if the Bible is right, that we were made at our core to give. All right. So I get it, and I'll give. But that brings us to our second question. Why give to the church? Right? Why not give to the Red Cross? Why not give to the Humane Society or a hospital or a university? I mean, some of you know I'm kind of a fan of K-State. Like right now, I love K-State. I have always loved K-State, but right now it's football season. Surely I'd be okay with you giving to K-State's football program, right? Yes. I want you to hear this. Those are really incredible organizations, and I love them. I'm grateful for our hospitals and our universities. I'm grateful for the organizations that make a difference in the world around us. I am so grateful for them. And if you trace back the history of most of them, I mean, the overwhelming majority of those great philanthropic organizations in the world, if you go all the way back to the beginning, you find that most of them were started by people who had this unshakable conviction that God wanted to do something different in the world and that God worked through people. Most of those organizations we know and love were started by people whose lives were changed by God and who felt a conviction to drive back the pain or the darkness or the brokenness in the world around them, who believes that God looks at a broken world and isn't content to leave it there, but instead works through broken people to bring it all to healing. Most of the great organizations we love were started by people whose lives were changed by the gospel. Hospitals were originally a Christian institution. Public schools in America were proliferated throughout the entire continent because there was an unshakable conviction that people needed to be able to read their scriptures even from a young age. K-State University, my favorite, started as Bluemont Central College of Manhattan, Kansas, by Methodists back east who saw a developing state in Kansas and wanted to make sure that there was higher institutions of learning for all of the people who would come here for years to come. We give to the church because it carries the message that changes our lives. Because as Christians, we carry forth the message that God cares about this world, that God is working to change this world. And that message changes our lives, and it begins to ripple throughout history and throughout the world around us, and it brings healing and hope and light in the darkness. Changed people change the world. I mean, just look at the last 12 months here. We've had team after team head to feed the homeless at Hope Faith. We've had a partnership with Good Shepherd here in our community to take care of people who have needs in our own town. We have a group called the United Methodist Women that feed great big suppers for people who are in the midst of grieving. We call them funeral dinners, and they're a great way to show love to somebody in a dark spot. The youth group took a week-long mission trip and then came back and did another week of service right here. Kids Rock has led service project after service project, from Super Bowl efforts to bikes to Beanie Babies this afternoon. Our kids ministry had a superhero day that was fun and taught the kids in the community some cool stuff, but also brought food to hungry families. This message ripples and brings hope in the darkness. But it's more than just help. See, this last week I looked back at kind of our attendance pattern, and I also looked back at kind of the news wave and in my own sermon archive. And it turns out that people tend to be, well, we have our highest attendance at church, that people come longing for hope when things in the world seem darkest. And most of you could guess that, right? But we had spikes after the Paris attacks, the San Bernardino shootings, after the spikes in the Syrian refugee crisis. See, there are times in our world that there are things that are so dark that we need hope. And we find there's only one hope big enough to face out the deepest darkness. That's the hope we hold here, that life is stronger than even death. The hope that we remember on Easter, that Christ can look at the worst in the world and bring out the best in hope. Why give to the church? Because we believe that life wins, that Christ brings love, that light shines brightest in the deepest darkness. Okay. So that's part 1 and part 2. I get it. This is why we give, because it's good for us, and this is why we give to the church, because it changes the world. But that brings us to our third question. Why give to the church generously? And I mean, I'll go ahead and disclaim I have a dog in this fight, right? Not because I work for the church, but because I believe in the church. But I want to look at it this way, because sometimes we look at giving as dollars and cents, but it's not really. It's deeper than that. It's about people. I want to tell you about a girl. Let's call her Sophia. This is Sophia. That's not actually her real name, but I can't tell you her real name. But what I can tell you is that she's a young girl living in an orphanage in Cambodia. If she was in America, she'd be about to start middle school. Maybe one day dreaming about running her own business, teaching a classroom full of bright-eyed kids like herself, curing cancer, or having a family. But Sophia's not in America, and things are a little bit different for girls like Sophia in Cambodia. See, the Cambodian economy is really dependent on the garment industry. Many of you know this. We've got shirts and clothing that says made in Cambodia. Most Cambodian exports, $5 out of $6 billion, come from shoes and clothing made in factories in Cambodia. And that's disproportionately impacting girls like Sophia. Because it turns out that these garment factories are one of the few places that girls like Sophia, orphans who grow up with little in the way of education or little in the way of opportunity, that garment industries in Sophia are disproportionately employing young women like Sophia. But that's a little bit scary. See, Human Rights Watch documented labor rights abuses, and I'm just going to list some of them at some of these factories. Overtime, retaliation against those who sought exemption from overtime, lack of rest breaks, denial of sick leave, use of underage child labor, union busting strategies, and women workers facing pregnancy-based discrimination, sexual harassment, and denial of maternity benefits. We have a name for the type of factories that wait for girls like Sophia. We call them sweatshops. They're pretty horrific. They're very illegal in the U.S. And yet in some developing countries like Cambodia, they're the only option for women and girls like Sophia. And at one point in her life, that would have been her future. But not anymore. So you can see Sophia is posing next to her shiny new bicycle. And yes, we think about a bike as a kid's toy, right? Like it'll bring joy, she'll have fun riding it, it'll be a great chance for her to get out and have a little break from some of parts of her life. But in the developing world, that bike's also going to be the thing that takes her from her orphanage to a school, so that Sophia can get an education. It's going to be the bike that takes her, once she gets that education, not just to take the closest job or the job within walking distance, but to have a wealth of job opportunities because she has the ability to travel farther. We found that in the developing world, that bikes broaden the future prospects for a human being in incredible ways. Sophia's future looks different. Sophia's future has changed from what it would have been to what it now might be. But I want you to look again at that picture of Sophia. Let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit farther. See how she's holding a picture of her own while she smiles? That picture looks like this picture. This picture right here that some of you are in. Somewhere in Cambodia, there's a little girl holding up a picture of some of your faces and smiling. This was our 88 Bikes Bike-a-thon. The Kids Rock team put together this summer. A team of young girls from our church decided they wanted to make a difference in the lives of people like Sophia. And so they began a project. And they raised funds, and many of you donated, and many of you participated, and many of you just supported this great thing. And you bought a bike for Sophia. But we didn't buy just one bike. See, Sophia is one of 14. Some of those bikes went to Cambodia, some to the Democratic Republic of Congo, some to different organizations and orphans and victims of human trafficking and sex trafficking all over the world. Turns out Sophia's bike is just around 1% of the funds given out to all outside projects from TUMC in the last year. See, Sophia is one story out of story after story I could tell about the awesome things that you have already done this far. Refugees in Syria getting water. Homes being rebuilt on the Gulf Coast in the wake of hurricanes. Medicine and education and hope. That's what the church does. That's who the church is. Our mission is to change lives in Tonganoxie. And it's to change futures all over the world.